Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, something a little different than usual today. As I promised a few months ago, we are from time to time going to look at some current events that relate to history, things that we'll be talking about 10, 20, 50 years from now. And obviously, some things have happened in the news in the last couple of days concerning the United States and the Monroe Doctrine and things of that nature with the operation that captured the dictator, the president of Venezuela, and the ripple effect that might have on a number of other things like Cuba and Colombia and Russia and Taiwan and all of these sorts of things. We are very likely watching history unfold. So Warfronts did a video a couple of days ago where they talked about this, and I thought it would be a good way for us to talk about the issue, talk about what's going on, look at examples of things like this that have happened in the past, including in my own lifetime, and see what we might learn from history about all this. I'll put the link down in the description. As always, you can check it out without my commentary. Let's go ahead and dive into this one.
The United States government has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who has been captured and flown out of the country. This operation was done in conjunction with US law enforcement. This was a message posted by American President Donald Trump on Saturday the 3rd of January at 4:21 a.m. Eastern Time, announcing to the world that the American government had achieved one of its key objectives, the capture of President Maduro. The date is important because, one, it's only a few hours ago, and two, it's exactly 35 years since the day that American forces captured Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega, who, like Maduro, had also been accused of drug trafficking and was clinging on to power after a disputed election.
Yeah, so there are definitely some parallels there. I remember the Noriega situation. A couple of differences with that situation and this one. First, the similarities. I mean, both accused of similar crimes, both in the same part of the world, Central America and Northern South America, that region there, what we call Latin America. Drugs are involved. One of the places that he was indicted was Miami, which is Maduro was indicted in Miami and in D.C. and in New York. Maduro is going to be tried in the Southern District of New York, which, if you've ever watched the show Billions, a lot of that focuses on that law office, that attorney, U.S. attorney, the Southern District of New York. So yeah, those are similarities. In the case of Noriega, he did spend a number of years in a U.S. prison. He was eventually, I think, paroled after serving a little over half of a 30-year sentence. He was then extradited to France to stand trial for crimes, and then they extradited him to Panama, which is where he came from originally, and he went to prison in Panama. Some differences. The capture of Noriega did not go as smoothly as this one did. Listen, for all the things you can say about the Trump administration, number one, they pulled this off without anybody leaking anything about it, which, granted, there's some questions about who they should have notified and didn't. Number two, they did it without losing any American lives. We haven't really heard yet about any civilian casualties that might have been involved. So it was a very smooth operation. You have to at least credit that. Panama, there were some other things going on besides just what was going on, but we have that too. I mean, there's obviously been stuff going on with Venezuela leading up to this.
In a later interview with Fox News, President Trump announced that Maduro and his wife had been taken to the USS Iwo Jima, one of the American warships that have been prowling the Caribbean. According to a statement by
the USS Iwo Jima is an amphibious assault ship. It's not an aircraft carrier, but it does carry a number. It can carry a bunch of helicopters, and I'm guessing that was where we saw some video of a bunch of Chinook helicopters, those long, like sausage-looking helicopters with two sets of propellers. A number of those coming in, and it can carry a lot of those.
General Pam Bondi. They will both be tried in a U.S. court. The announcement came just hours after residents of Caracas, including several CNN correspondents, reported hearing explosions and seeing military aircraft flying overhead. According to the correspondents, the first blast that they witnessed happened at 12:50 a.m. Eastern Time, which means that in barely 3 hours, American forces had captured a sitting head of state and evacuated him from his country. I'll say that again. This entire operation took just 3.5 hours. So because 2026 has decided to get off to an insane start, that's why I'm here on a Saturday afternoon, let's examine what we know, what we don't know, and what this attack means for the wider region.
So I have to say, I like Simon with the sweater and kind of the relaxed kind of look there, and as always, the epic beard, which I'm always jealous of because I can't grow an epic beard.
Let's start with what we know as the time of around 4
Solid
p.m.
beard.
Central European time. 4:15. We are getting this out. On Friday, the 2nd of January, President Maduro appeared on state television while meeting with a delegation of Chinese officials in Caracas.
This is important because there's a lot of speculation about what this means beyond Venezuela and what message is being sent to regimes like the one in China. Now, here's the thing. You can look at this from two angles. One is we're sending a message to China that we are reasserting ourselves in the Western Hemisphere, a la the Monroe Doctrine. I think Trump even referred to it as the Monroe Doctrine in his press conference, which he did. He seemed really tired to me. But he still kind of went on his off-script thing. He's much better when he just sticks to the script, sticks to the prepared remarks. But this also can potentially be interpreted by China as, hey, if you're going to, kind of project yourself in your sphere of influence, we're going to do the same. And it would be hard to argue against China moving on Taiwan in this scenario.
This was the last time that he would be seen in public. A few hours later, the strikes began. A local journalist who spoke with NPR reported hearing 2 explosions at La Carlota military airport, the main airbase in Caracas, followed by fires on the runway that were quickly put out. Immediately afterward, they reported hearing similar detonations in other parts of the city and planes flying low over Caracas for about an hour.
So I'm curious about how much of this was just taking out the air defenses so that because those Chinooks, they don't exactly move super fast. So you obviously need to deal with any air defenses so that they're not launching missiles to take out your helicopters. How much of that was taking out radar and air defenses? How much of it was maybe CIA assets on the ground doing things to disrupt and distract so that this could happen?
Quoting, "The whole ground shook. This is horrible. We heard explosions and planes." The Associated Press reported that at least 7 explosions were heard in Caracas during that time, and according to Ocent Fender and...
Okay, so here we go. We can get a look at the places that were targeted. Main military base, main air base, main signal antenna, there you go. Disrupt communications. The main port of Venezuela, and the air base in the state of Miranda. All right, that all makes a lot of sense if you're trying to keep them from being able to respond rapidly so that you can get in and get out before they can do anything about it.
X account that uses open source intelligence to track conflicts around the world. Fuerte Tuna, the capital's main military base, had also been targeted in these strikes. Other sites that were targeted include Cerro El Volcan, a major communications and signals antenna site, La Guaira Airport, Venezuela's primary seaport north of Caracas, and Hirarte Airport, an airbase in Miranda State. While other locations may have been targeted, these are the only ones that have been confirmed by sources on the ground. According to American officials who spoke with CBS, Delta Force, an elite special forces unit of the U.S. Army, carried out the attacks. The same officials...
So each of the U.S. branches of the military has its own kind of elite quick strike force like this that you can send in for an operation. Obviously, we think a lot of Navy SEALs, SEAL Team 6, who did the Bin Laden operation. You have, I think, Air Force combat controllers, they call them. You have Delta Force in the U.S. Army.
Told CBS that the military had discussed conducting the mission in Venezuela on Christmas Day, but U.S. airstrikes in Nigeria against ISIS targets took precedence. The days after Christmas gave the military more options, but the operation was held off until the weather was favorable enough to proceed. And proceed it did. Once the dust had settled, Maduro had been captured, and Trump made his announcement on Truth Social. And with that, the unspoken assumptions of that last 3.5 decades of US policy towards Latin America had been flipped on their head.
Yeah, and of course the issue is here, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this. I want to look ahead and see what they're going to talk about, just as what we know and what we don't. What does this mean? Yeah. What does this mean for Venezuela? Because it's not like he was the only member of his government that was indicted, that was involved in a lot of this stuff, if we are to believe, all the sources about their involvement in cartels and things like that. We didn't decapitate the government. We just arrested the head of government. The vice president is now the president, and she is very much along the same lines as him. But we'll get into that.
At the moment, it seems that there won't be any further attacks. Mike Lee, a US Senator who spoke with Secretary of State Marco Rubio after the attacks, posted on X that the Secretary anticipated no further action now that Maduro was in custody.
Yeah, so I tell you what, Marco Rubio is a guy who, you go back to 2016, and he was one of that big group of Republicans who was running for president along with Donald Trump. And Rubio is always been seen as a very capable guy and kind of a rising star within the Republican Party. And you can see it's very interesting to see how much he is at the forefront of this government right now, because it harkens back to the early days of the United States, when the Secretary of State was very much like the right-hand man of the president. And of course, there's this potential for kind of a civil war within and kind of an influence struggle within Trump's government, because who is the heir apparent to Trump? Is it J.D. Vance or is it Marco Rubio? And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over time, because you saw in the aftermath of all this, because Rubio is once again, and he's the subject of a lot of memes where every time, like, the Browns fired their coach today, and now everybody's like, well, now Marco Rubio is going to have to be the coach of the Browns, because Trump keeps giving him more responsibility, and so it has become this meme. But the fact is, J.D. Vance then and his people are on the sidelines thinking, wow, Rubio's getting the spotlight. How do we make sure that we were a part of this too and get the word out about that? So that kind of stuff is going on behind the scenes.
He also announced that Maduro would stand trial on criminal charges in the US, where he has been charged with narco-terrorism, corruption, drug trafficking, and a host of other criminal charges. Not that the lack of planned further attacks made much difference in Caracas. The government announced a state of emergency, demanded proof that Maduro was alive, and an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council to discuss the US attacks.
Here's the thing with the UN Security Council. It's basically worthless for these kinds of things, because you have 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. You have the UK, France, Russia, the United States, and China. And anytime there's anything significant like this, they're not going to do anything about it, because those 5 permanent members of the Security Council have veto power over anything that comes out of there. And of course, the U.S. is going to veto anything that might be in any way negative toward the United States when it comes to this.
Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Pedrino Lopez, while calling for calm and a unified front, announced that the military would be deployed across the nation to defend against what he called the worst aggression ever against Venezuela. Quoting me here, "They've attacked us, but they will not subdue us. Let's not succumb to the panic the enemy seeks to instill."
And here's the thing, too, is that you had these, and we saw some video of this, these pro-government gangs that were out on the street in the aftermath of this. And I was watching a lot of the coverage on CNN and things like that, and they were talking to people from Venezuela, or even people in Venezuela, and they basically said, listen, there's probably a lot of people here that would celebrate this, but they're afraid to, because you've got these pro-government gangs. We've seen a history with Maduro, and listen, understand that when I'm talking about this, I'm not necessarily saying I agree with this action or disagree with this action. Let's see it play out. And let's see what this enables or empowers countries like Russia and China to feel like they can do in the aftermath of this, because it's hard to argue against, say, China, like I said earlier, doing something over Taiwan in light of us taking this kind of unilateral action. So it does work both ways. But there's definitely been a lot of extrajudicial killings that have gone on, and there's serious questions about the legality of the recent presidential election, because the argument is that there's evidence that the challenger in the race against Maduro overwhelmingly won, but that Maduro said, no, I actually won with like 59% of the vote. And then they suppress anyone who might speak out against that. So we really don't know how people in Venezuela feel about this.
Additionally, Caracas urged supporters to take to the streets. This call was answered in neighborhoods in which Maduro enjoys popular support, where, according to the AP, armed individuals and ununiformed members of a civilian militia took to the streets while holding posters of Maduro.
And we actually saw a video that was shot from rooftops that day of guns being fired and things like that at people in the streets.
Across the city, the streets remained empty hours after the attack. Parts of the city remained without power, but vehicles moved freely. Outside of Venezuela, reactions have been varied, to say the least. In Latin America, Argentinian President Javier Milei celebrated the news, saying that freedom had finally come to Venezuela, while Colombian President Gustavo Petro, who has also been a target of Trump's ire, condemned the strike.
Yeah, and you had condemnations from Russia, Belarus, Hezbollah, all the people you would expect to condemn anything the U.S. does. The French president came out with a fairly positive statement in favor of what was happening, so you just get a mix of that.
As an assault on the sovereignty of Latin America. Warning of a humanitarian crisis. Additionally, Colombia is deploying its military to its 2,219-kilometer-long border with Venezuela, ostensibly to handle the influx of asylum seekers. But
remember that we've literally seen millions of people flee Venezuela in the last several years over all of what's going on there. Since it goes back to a coup that happened like 25 years ago in Venezuela, and then, of course, you had Hugo Chavez, and now Maduro has taken over after Chavez's death.
Also as a defensive measure in case the conflict expands beyond Venezuela's borders. In Europe, the reaction has been more measured, with Germany saying that it was watching the situation with great concern, Spain offering to mediate.
That's kind of like where you have to say something, but you don't want to alienate anybody, and you don't want to, despite how you might feel privately about the U.S.'s actions, you're not going to straight up praise it, and you're not going to condemn it either. You're going to be very, like he said, measured in your response.
And the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs urging restraint while insisting that Maduro lacked legitimacy. More telling, though, might have been the reaction, or lack of it, from Venezuela's most important allies, Iran, Cuba, and Russia. For Russia's part, the Kremlin said it was deeply worried by the attack, saying that it was important to prevent escalation and to use dialogue to find a way out of the conflict.
Listen, what's Russia going to do? I mean, really, number one, with their actions in Ukraine, they have no credibility to speak one way or the other about the issue. But also with the struggle they've had to gain victory in Ukraine, it's not like they're really in a position to make any sorts of threats toward anybody.
What it didn't say was that today's events came just months after Moscow and Caracas signed a new strategic partnership meant in part to improve Venezuela's military.
And there's an important aspect of this, is that China and Russia have ties with Venezuela, and this was no doubt a message to them, even though we haven't necessarily heard that part said out loud.
A partnership that seems to have been about as useful to Caracas as Iran's partnership with Russia was for Tehran during last year's war with Israel. Savage. Speaking of Tehran, Iran's foreign ministry described the attack as a flagrant violation.
And listen, Iran's got their own stuff going on. We may need to talk about that at some point. There's a lot of uprisings and upheaval going on right there. It's going to be interesting to see how all that plays out.
The national sovereignty and territorial integrity of Venezuela, while Cuba's President Miguel Diaz-Canel Bermudez called for the international community to denounce what he described as state terrorism against the Venezuelan people.
And Cuba obviously has to be thinking about what this means for them, and there have already been hints about that. And I believe Marco Rubio himself is a Cuban American, and Cuban Americans tend to be more on the right than say Mexican Americans are. So it'll be curious to see how that affects them, because this is obviously, as we talked about the Monroe Doctrine, if you're not familiar with the Monroe Doctrine, it goes back to James Monroe, who was Secretary of State and then later President of the United States. And it was very much the United States communicating to European powers to stay the heck out of North and South America, and by extension, the United States saying, this is our sphere, we'll stay over here and you stay over there. We'll worry about what's happening here, you worry about what's happening there.
And just in case you're playing Axis of Resistance bingo there, China, another friend of Venezuela, is yet to publicly respond. With all this in mind, let's now look at what we don't know. First, there is the question of the legality of the strikes. While Senator Lee, a constitutional lawyer, insisted that the Trump administration was justified in conducting the strike since the president had the authority to protect U.S. personnel from an actual or imminent attack, Democratic lawmakers, including Senator Andy Kim, a former diplomat, have termed the action illegal, saying that it put American lives at risk and signaled to other superpowers that targeting a sitting head of state is acceptable to the U.S. government.
And that is a fair concern in all of this, right? And, that's the thing with a lot of this stuff, whether it's the strikes on the boats that are suspected of carrying drugs or this, is that so much of this is kind of like in a gray area that's open to interpretation. Like what is the U.S.'s legal obligation in all of this? What can the U.S. do in terms of the legality of someone that they have filed charges against? Because listen, let's be fair. There are a lot of people who are condemning Trump's actions who would gladly, if given the chance, go in and grab Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel the exact same way if they had the opportunity and thought they could get away with it. So much of this is politics, right? If this was a Democrat president who had done this, you'd have Republican lawmakers coming out and saying the exact same things. So, it's all so much of it depends on how you interpret it.
Now, we're not experts on the nuances of the American Constitution, but we can guarantee that this is a question that Congress and possibly the Supreme Court will have to answer at some point in the future.
Yes.
Second, we don't know who is now in charge of Venezuela and how long their rule will last.
Yeah, that's the question. Is there a power vacuum now? Is there going to be a struggle between, say, the defense minister and the woman who was vice president and is now running the country? Or is it going to be peaceful and smooth? Hard to say.
At the moment, it seems much of Maduro's inner circle survived the strikes, and the vice president will take over, maintaining the current status quo. However, there are two distinct scenarios that we have to consider. One, that America negotiates with the remaining government officials to hand over power to Edmundo Gonzalez, who Washington recognized as Venezuela's rightful president after the
who I think most of the world recognizes won that election.
Contested 2024 elections, or two, that the military takes advantage of the confusion and disarray created by the American strikes to seize power in a coup.
And here's what I really didn't like. I watched the whole press conference in the aftermath of this. If I know we're talking about Trump, so you never know what you're going to get, and you can't necessarily just take what he said at face value. Because who knows what's going to happen. But I didn't like how he basically said, we're going to run Venezuela until they can get their government going. And he basically dropped all the stuff about oil in there too. Because the big concern, of course, before that press conference is this just an oil grab? Because Venezuela's sitting on arguably the largest oil reserve in the world. Certainly one of, if not the largest. And so obviously the United States would love to have its hands on that kind of stuff, but it's not ours. And so by him saying that stuff, that certainly took a lot of the moral high ground he might have potentially had by saying this is about drugs, this is about a criminal that we apprehended and we're going to hold, have stand trial, instead of making Venezuela a puppet so we can get cheap oil. So I really didn't like that. And it'll be interesting to see how that part plays out. Because the most important thing the U.S. needs to do right now is make sure that the legitimately elected government is in charge and that they get to make those decisions themselves. Not the oil companies, not the United States.
It wouldn't be the first time that the military sought to gain power by taking advantage of a crisis. This was a fear expressed by Pedro Reyes Arroyo, a Venezuelan entrepreneur who, speaking exclusively to Warfronts, said that the vacuum of power left in Maduro's absence could embolden individuals in the military to launch violent bids for the presidency, resulting in, and we'll quote him here, a bloodbath.
This is obviously, and I saw a lot of people talking about this in Discord and on social media, this is, of course, one of the worst case scenarios. And for younger, like I'm old enough to remember Noriega. I'm old enough to remember missions like that. Younger generations, obviously, their point of reference for this is Saddam Hussein and Iraq, which went very, very badly. And we saw what happened when a vacuum of power got created, when a dictator was removed but got replaced by something even worse. So that is a concern that we have to be watching.
If the second scenario were to occur, there is the possibility that Washington will be forced to launch another operation to install a government that has their support. The third thing we don't know, and which may be the most important, is whether Maduro made a deal with Washington and the attacks were theater to give him a face-saving exit from power.
I've seen people propose that idea, and that's not out of the realm of possibility. But at the same time, you had folks like Secretary of State Rubio directly saying repeatedly, listen, we gave the guy multiple opportunities. We gave him chances to flee the country, to go into exile, and he didn't take it. So now he's dealing with this. So I could see a scenario where if he had made such a deal that we would have gone in and guaranteed his safety to get out. So I feel like the evidence doesn't support that, but it's certainly a possibility.
While this does seem unlikely, some in the Venezuelan opposition told Sky News that this could be the case, given that Maduro has repeatedly expressed his willingness to negotiate with Trump. However, we've got to be honest here, this doesn't seem super plausible, considering that Senator Lee announced Maduro would be facing charges in the United States. It's also unlikely that Trump would be willing to let Maduro save face after the acrimonious year that the two have had. Additionally, Rubio is a long-time Maduro opponent who has been pushing for the latter's ouster, so the possibility that Washington chose to be gracious to Maduro is incredibly slim.
I agree.
However, slim ain't zero. So what's this mean for the region? When looking at this attack against Venezuela, it is tempting to see it as just part of Trump and Rubio's campaign against Maduro. However, that would be missing the forest for the trees. There's a bigger strategy at play here, one that was revealed in the recently published National Security Strategy. Now, in case you missed our video analyzing that document, here's what you need to know. On Latin America, the Trump administration announced that it would be reinstituting the Monroe Doctrine, which basically means that the entire Western Hemisphere is Washington's backyard.
Yeah, that's why we have to see this as part of a bigger picture. This is a message, this is an action that's part of a larger foreign policy by the United States. That's why Colombia, Cuba, other places are being discussed right now, because this is not the only thing that's going to happen with all of this.
Other superpowers, they're not welcome, and regimes in every country need to be aligned with America's interests, or they will have to deal with an angry Washington. This is why the operation matters far beyond Venezuela's borders. Every leader in Latin America is now watching and calculating. If the United States can conduct a decapitation strike against a sitting president in a matter of hours, what does that mean for their own security?
That's a great point, because, listen, again, whatever you may think about whether this action should have been done or not, we can't ignore the fact that it was pulled off pretty much flawlessly. I mean, what they did, not losing a single, that's not easy to do. Keeping it silent, surprising everyone with it, you have to at least credit the action, the success of the action, even if you disagree vehemently with the action itself. But again, what does this mean for countries in other parts of the world, for China? I mean, we have zero credibility to complain about China doing anything like this now.
What red lines exist anymore? Cuba's got to be particularly nervous right now.
Yeah.
The island nation depends heavily on Venezuelan oil and has sent thousands of personnel to Venezuela over the years. It has also spent entire decades on Washington's hit list, with the CIA infamously trying to bump off Fidel Castro with everything from regular bullets to exploding cigars.
I mean, that was 2/3 of a century ago, but the point remains.
With Maduro gone, Cuba loses a critical economic lifeline, while its leadership will be terrified that they're next for special US treatment. Nicaragua's Daniel Ortega, another vocal critic of Washington with close ties to Russia and China, must also be wondering if he's on the list. And while Colombian President Gustavo Petro is likely safe due to Bogotá's long history of cooperation with Washington, he is likely, at the very least, feeling a bit anxious today. But it's not just America's adversaries who should be recalculating. Even friendly governments should be asking questions about what their relationship with Washington means for their rule. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has maintained a delicate balancing act between Washington and her own agenda. Now, she undoubtedly faces pressure to more definitively support what Trump wants, even if it goes against what she wants.
And keep in mind that Trump's only a year into his second term. He's still got 3 years left, so it's not like they can wait him out. A lot can happen. Now, granted, we do have congressional elections later this year, and if history is any indication, the Democrats will likely, at the very least, take back the House of Representatives, and that's seriously going to hamstring what Trump can do moving forward. So he's really got a little less than a year to do some of this stuff before they start coming after him.
Brazil's Lula has tried to position himself as a mediator in regional conflicts. That role just became a lot more complicated. The operation also changes the calculus for Chinese and Russian investment in the region. Beijing has poured billions into Latin American infrastructure, mining and energy projects. Moscow has sold weapons and provided technical assistance to several governments. Both have used Venezuela as their primary foothold in the hemisphere.
Yep.
If Washington can remove a government this decisively, does that make other countries think?
Didn't really remove the government, though, and I think that's an important distinction. The government of Venezuela is still in place. We took the president, but his people are still running the country as far as we can tell.
Twice about deepening ties with Beijing or Moscow? Or does it push them to seek stronger guarantees from those powers? And do these guarantees mean anything in the face of a Washington that has proven extremely capable of removing a leader in his own capital city? Again, we have to insist here. The entire operation took less than 3 hours and change. That's so short, it makes Israel's decisive 12-day conflict against Iran look like the 30 years war. There's also the question of what happens to Venezuela's oil. The country has the world's largest proven oil reserve. With Maduro gone, those reserves could be up for grabs. China has massive investments in Venezuelan oil infrastructure. Russian companies have been involved in joint ventures. American companies were largely shut out under sanctions. The scramble to control Venezuelan oil could reshape global energy markets.
That is not an understatement. I mean, if the U.S. is able to start accessing Venezuelan oil and doesn't have to get so much from other places, game changer, right? A complete reshifting of things. Hard to say what's going to happen.
Finally, there's the humanitarian dimension. Venezuela has already produced one of the largest refugee crises in recent history, with millions fleeing the country since 2015. Colombia, which hosts the largest number of Venezuelan refugees, is already deploying troops to the border. If violence escalates or the economy collapses further, that number could surge. Peru, Ecuador, Chile, and other countries hosting Venezuelan migrants are bracing for what comes next. And hovering above all of this is the question of what will happen if Venezuela splits apart, if the remnants of the regime try to cling to power while the people rise up in the streets. Could there be wide-scale violence?
Could
a
be.
civil war?
These are all important things we have to keep an eye on. There's so many different directions this can all go.
Or will the regime or military quickly consolidate under new leadership and carry on effectively as before? As Tiziano Breda, senior analyst for Latin America at ACLED, has noted, quote, "A smooth transition remains unlikely, and the risk of resistance from pro-regime armed groups, including elements within the military and Colombian rebel networks active in the country, remains high."
And so let's not forget that the people who are most victims in all of this are the people of Venezuela, the civilians there. They're the ones that are caught in the middle of all of this. It's their lives that are at risk. It's their homes that may be lost. It's them that have to think about fleeing if they haven't already. And that should be always close in our minds in all of this.
In short, we can't say for certain what will happen next. What we can say is that this is a crisis whose impact will be felt long after Maduro's successor has been chosen.
Yeah, what do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. Let's talk about this. The only thing I ask, since we're dealing with current events, is that say what you want to say, be vehement, be strong, defend your positions, but in your disagreement, don't be disagreeable. Don't make it about personal attacks. Don't make it about insults. Make it about the facts and the information and history. Let's keep it to that. Thanks for watching.